from the team Studio Tourism and Travel, University of Applied Sciences, Worms.
Guten Tag, meine sehr
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Come in. Have a seat. I don't know how many of you were here for the previous presentation by Professor Hensler. He had a lot of interesting keywords, a lot of interesting applications, in particular for Industry 4.0 and the Internet of Things, and a few future developments which we can see then coming online. For example, the Google car, which is a self-driving car, or for example, the Amazon robot in the warehouses, or the human-like robot in a hotel at the reception. And you can see there's a bit of a doubt in my voice. But first of all, we saw that we see here, this is in the area of logistics. And what we're seeing is that it has a lot to do with communications. But events are communications problems, not logistics. And those are the jobs and tasks that we face here. For example, the Google car could be useful, but only, for example, for a shuttle service. But what would be interesting to me, what can we do to improve the interaction and interactivity of our events? Are there limits that we face? And this is my second comment as regards that. Technology itself might work, but that isn't what moves us. We're not talking here about electricity disruptions, things like that. What's key and paramount is what we do with that technology and how we use it. We have a lot of possibilities. We've seen a lot. And sometimes it's disturbing. And disturbing things can be interesting, but here and today, I could just say quite simply, read my lips, perhaps at the expense of being ridiculous. A lot of things that we've seen here today won't necessarily then come to pass. We talk about, for example, Second Life. Does anybody remember Second Life? Do you know how long ago that was? Remember when we said, and those were the founders of Linden Labs who were here, who created this platform. They said that if you are not going to be a part of Second Life tomorrow, you're going to be dead day after tomorrow. But who is dead now? In fact, it's Linden Labs who stopped in their wing, right in their tracks. But impossible it's to imagine. It's been 8 years since Second Life. I would say probably only a handful of you still have Second Life on their screens, as it were. But some of these things will be coming along and will be developing further. And some of them will, in fact, revolutionize our meetings and our events. But we have to divide the two, and we have to separate the wheat from the chaff, and not necessarily then add too much or put too much value upon some technologies over others. Now, let's see if I can move on to my next slide. Fantastic. We heard the buzzword bingo, earlier on. Now, look at this. If this is not confusing, I don't know what is. This is digital virgin territory. And, of course, one had said that before, and that was Miss Merkel, and she then also survived a firestorm because of it. But looking at these terms here, for example, we have virtual reality, augmented reality. But what's really interesting is the term then, for example, location-based services and push services, streaming, of course, social media. Some media agencies say that there aren't going to be any successful events which are not, in fact, involved with social media. Well, I don't know if that's quite true, and I don't know if that's quite digital virgin territory we're talking here. We then also see, for example, here a revolutionary innovation warehouses, and in this situation, definitely we see it being revolutionary. But what about society at large? There are some apologists who said at the time that the internet had to remain a domain free of laws and legislation, and do that today. But I think we need to also move with the times. And as you can see, I always look at these things with a bit of skepticism, healthy perhaps. The buzzword is perhaps some of the euphoric hypotheses that have been promoted in the last few years. For example, the events of the future will be digital. Well, or the next one, in the future, there will be no future of successful events without social media. Or, for example, that fairs and events first will only become really interactive through the internet. You just give these a thought and take your time to think, how do we have to understand them so that these statements are right and correct? But I think you'll find actually that there are problematic instances in each of them, and they're also quite general. It all started off with Event 2.0 as a part of a web that you can get involved in, for example. But I don't need social networks for every single event. Some, they're useful, others not. And sometimes we want to be in our own closed circles and don't want to necessarily discuss things on Facebook at all. Also, hybrid event is also a topic and a term that is really getting to grips with over time, because it's really a combination of on-site events and also SoLoMo. SoLoMo is also in the title of my presentation, and I do mean it quite ironically, because I think this is just one of many buzzwords that we are encountering time and again. So, it's from social media, location-based services, and Mo for mobile applications. Social media include Facebook, for example, Xing, LinkedIn, Twitter, YouTube, Flickr, you know the lot. Location-based services, we have location-based services, for example, augmented reality. So what we're doing is we're augmenting reality with digital information, for example, using pitch services to provide extra information that's then sent to my smartphone, or mobile applications, which are dovetailed, of course, all of them. For example, we have mobile services to my end device, and we have, for example, event apps, which I believe, for example, the future belongs to when we get to the point that everyone has a smartphone. And you in this audience, let me ask you spontaneously, who has a smartphone? I asked that question once, and we were already at 99% of the audience. But you are not representative. You are special. And we don't have a 99% saturation rate in German society, and it will take time to get there. There are some people who just refuse to use smartphones. What do you do when you have them in your audience? Then you're going to have to provide them with a smartphone to use. And of course, there are then others who are going to profit from that and be happy about that. But what's important for us as organizers, live streaming, videos on demand, downloads, and also uploads, of course. That's what we mean by when we use the term SoLoMo. Just in case, and just so that we've actually also then talked about this issue, all these different letters that we put together in our alphabet soup. So what can digitalization mean for your event? That's the one question. The second point I'd like to discuss with you is that we also put them in a little bit of order. As Mr. Fritzke had mentioned about our housekeeping today, does it all make sense? And is it all going to contribute? Are these things all going to contribute to the success of an event? So right from the word go, it's important to then divide up our event into different phases, and we can then look at what we can add, digitally speaking, to each of those phases. At the beginning is, in fact, pre-event, and we're talking here about creating and generating the topics. We can do this from, for example, crowdsourcing. For example, consumer goods producers do this quite often when they ask their users, for example, what they would like to have, and also what are their preferences. Or we can quite simply just monitor our target groups through social media. And of course, then you can also gain and collect important, relevant information about your target groups. So you can start right from the conceptualization phase, for example, systematically surveying and also observing and evaluating interesting chats and messages in blogs, chat rooms, and fora. You can start off with that, but you don't have to necessarily finish and go all the way through that. But you can also use crowdsourcing, for example. A competition for new ideas. And this is also a way of creating interest in the event before it actually really gets going. Also, beforehand, I can provide audio and video streams. They're important marketing instruments for me. On the one hand, my target group is better informed beforehand, and on the other hand, we also have potential here, for example, multiplicators. We can also then distribute that information, for example, from one party to the next through links, for example. Also pre-event, we have blogs, chat rooms, fora, where potential participants can already exchange on the event before it actually happens. This is all very hands-on. It's perhaps for some rather boring, but in fact, this can be very helpful. Here's an example. This is from the social media newsroom of the Frankfurt Fair. For example, you have up-to-date press statements and information, corporate information, real-time tweets, Flickr streams with image material as well, and also YouTube channels with videos, RSS feeds, and an app. Imagine this wasn't the Frankfurt Trade Fair's page, but it was the page for your event. That could be very useful. Not every time, but it's worth looking into. And I'm sure we're moving in the direction of events having their own pages. And the platforms here that we have for interaction, especially in B2B, in particular in social networks, it's not just about being on Facebook, but it's about creating your own area and your own space. And then you have more control over who's reading what, as opposed to, say, for example. And you can also then divide it into segments also better that fit your ideas better. And this is, of course, this B2B is, of course, important because then it's also slightly different to B2C, where we have that split of 1/3 to 2/3. So now we've talked a lot about pre-event activities. Let's move into the actual event. Mobile services that can, for example, navigate the participants through the event. For example, you can get updates that can tell you, go to stand number 7, for example, now. And then you also see different exhibitors at different stands. You can also then navigate your audiences, also using push services as well as pull services. Also apps, file sharing. We have a lot of different opportunities here to do so. One example, I'm not affiliated with this company, with Xing, is just an example of what event organizers offer in this area. For example, your own event web design with your corporate design, a ticket shop behind in the back office there, which is integrated, as well as also registration management and also linking posts through social media. And of course, then this can be used by different event organizers. Also, location-based services. We have augmented reality here. These talking places then interact with you, explain themselves to you, congress guides, and of course, this is all digital, so we're also saving the environment by saving paper. And we also have social media services here, for example, Facebook Places, Foursquare, Twitter, and they can be used by participants. Live streaming, either via your own event website or via a YouTube link, depending on what you find important in your overall concept. Always think about the controlling opportunities here, checking and points within your event, for example, by using elements and, for example, factors such as polling or voting. You can, of course, use conventional TED systems, or you can then also use social networks using your own homepage or, for example, other social media. Interesting here, this is really a way of checking up on the event in event. Nobody thinks about that when they use this term and say, oh, there's someone coming in who's going to check on and check on what we're doing. But it helps us also then zoom in on what participants want using polling and voting. What we want to do is increase the interactivity levels of our events, and that's what we can do using these feedback channels. Social media. This is really, in fact, necessary that we do so, this type of monitoring in event. Now here, Event. I'm also not affiliated with that company, but they do some interesting things here. For example, you have a virtual fair stands here. You can see have an individual solution. It's not really actually to replace the traditional event stand, but it's actually a supplementary. And I think that's important. That's what it can do rather than replace a traditional stand. But it's an add-on. An add-on service, indeed, is what it could then provide. You can see here, show floor 1, 2, you can go there, or you can go to the auditorium. There might be a press conference. When you click on these different points, you then unleash an interaction, and there's also a TED room here as well, and a chat room here as well. This is not going to be the future. It could just be a sidekick or an add-on parallel activity for those, for example, who choose to stay at home for whatever reason. And now we're coming to the next part. That's post-event, blogs, chat rooms, fora on your event page, or also in social media. Of course, you can also then monitor the social media there and then receive feedback. And of course, you should also offer those who stayed at home, you can give them videos on demand video streamings with highlights of the event. And also, of course, then share the ability to share files and also people's participants' impressions, for example, of the event through videos, photographs, for example, and images. Post-event, and that's in fact just a summary of what I'd said beforehand. This is an overview of what you can do. And now perhaps a not completely uncritical review of what is possible. Of course, digitally optimized events. The advantages, of course, offer participants more information and more detailed information, and at all times. That means that the participants become more independent, and of course, then they favor that. A higher level and higher frequency or greater frequency of interaction pre and post-event, not just during the event. And that is really the key point, pre and post-event. And that means that the event the duration of the event is in fact longer. That also means I reach a greater number of people. And of course, then I have an additional marketing instrument, and I can then create a bigger buzz around my event. And that means that I can act. And also I can use, for example, viral marketing, so that it's through word of mouth that people are recommending our event to others. So these are a lot of good points that speak in favor of events that are digitally optimized, as I like to call it. But there are also significant disadvantages. We don't want to talk about the technical side of things, but things don't always continue smoothly along this path.
I have to be very blunt here. Some people who are real advocates of this wonderful new era suggest that the interaction quality of events could actually be enhanced. And that could be done by including digital interactions. The frequency of interactions would certainly augment. However, if you replace real-world interactions with digital interactions, then the overall quality will drop, because interacting online is never as high quality as interacting in person. There's a lot of research that's been done on this. So if you end up with a human-machine human dialogue, you have a problem. It's much better to have a human-human dialogue with two people talking to each other. Multisensorics took this as an idea that emphasized why events on the spot are such a positive aspect. But if you take that argument seriously, it means that if you replace content with digital content, you might actually have events which address all the senses to a much lower degree, not to a greater degree. So multisensorics means that the internet cannot address and reach all of our senses, and perhaps people might not get so enthusiastic. Actually, look here at a shared experience. Virtual events don't get people all enthusiastic, as is the case on this slide. We need to be realistic on this front. There's also no basis of trust and confidence. That's partly because, as Gregory Northcraft found in a study, the following happens. This professor took 3 groups of students, and they had tricky tasks to model. It related to disarmament talk. Group 1 could only communicate via email. Group 2 could also have video conferences, and Group 3 was also allowed to meet in person. And you can guess which group managed to solve the problem, more or less. It was only Group 3. Group 1 failed immediately. We all know how confusing and easily misunderstood emails can be. You have this problem day in and day out, so that's difficult when you're dealing with complex issues, particularly if there's a need for trust or confidence. Now, of course, in your business life, you need trust day in and day out. It's essential for your business success. And that kind of trust is something you can only establish and reinvigorate through personal contacts. Video conferences and other digital and virtual tools can supplement what already exists. They can extend the time frame. They can fill in between two personal meetings, but it's not something that can substitute for actual face-to-face meetings. So personal meetings are crucial for creating trust and are indispensable when it comes to business success. I would totally agree with Jürgen Buschi on that one. Now, of course, all that glitters is not gold. It's great with all of these opportunities, no question about that. I'm not being ironic on this point at all. However, you need to bear in mind that online communication creates new interfaces that calls for management capacity. I took this image here because you can imagine that during the event you might be receiving X sum of notifications and communications, because of course if you trigger this you have to get to grips with it as well. And it's quite possible that participants' attention is really diverted from the actual content of the event. That's a real risk if you don't do it right. There's also the question of data protection and, of course, data or digital overkill. And there's another interesting word here as well, phubbing. Maybe you've heard of that term already. If you want your guests to blog and chat and post at all price, you can imagine that your next event might look like this. I don't know if that's really what you actually want, as a matter of fact. Less is more, as a matter of fact. We should really use these digital tools to support what's happening in the real world. It's a question of what is the most important level. The most important level for us in event management is, of course, people. Phubbing is a term that comes from phone combined with snubbing, and you can see that in the States there are already ads against phubbing. And these actually date back to a few years ago. The topic popped up a few years ago in the States, and that, of course, tends to end up eventually in Europe as well. So during the event, keep your phone in your pocket. Attention phubbers, no tweeting, no Facebook, no Instagram, no Foursquare, and no sexting. You might ask what sexting is. Well, that means putting erotic images of yourself on the internet. There are indeed no limits to people's foolishness. People do that all the time. So if you have to point out to participants that they shouldn't be online the whole time, you must bear in mind that the digital realm isn't just a matter of opportunities, but also of risks. Virtual communication, this is what my message in a nutshell. Virtual communication can add an additional element to events where people are on the spot, but it can't replace them. Now I come to the term hybrid event, which I think is erroneous on two counts. It creates the impression that a hybrid event isn't just an event, but it's some kind of new genre of event. And some event agencies say that's the case. They claim it's a brand new creature. Well, that's not the case at all. It's a standard run-of-the-mill event with people on the spot, plus state-of-the-art media technology. We didn't talk about print events in the past because we sent out invitations on paper, so bear that analogy in mind. You always have to use state-of-the-art media. There's nothing particularly peculiar about that. You really can't talk about a new genre, and hybrid also means combined. Think, for example, of the hybrid drive in the automobile sector. Diesel plus electric, or a conventional motor plus an electric system. And of course, this presupposes the notion of meeting in person and meeting in the virtual world can be equated, but they're not on an equal footing. Well, they can't be said to be on equal footing unless we want to cut off our nose to spite our faces, event managers. There's the question of contact quality, appealing to all the senses. Personal encounters are the central USP of events, otherwise we'd have a problem if that wasn't the essence of our tenets. It seems strange that some event agents act as if they're really just on the internet. I wouldn't say stick to what you know, because of course what you know is changing and the whole business is changing. But if we once said to our customers, well, a multi-sensory approach is something that events can do, and only events, and now you suddenly come along and say to your clients, oh, well, but you need the digital realm as well. That doesn't make sense. It's contradictory. You have to bear in mind that appealing to all the senses continues to be important. Now, of course, in the run-up to the event and after the event, you can use the digital media to increase the frequency of interactions to improve the event overall, but that must not be a substitute for personal encounters. You don't want to have competition between personal interaction and digital interaction. So it's not a hybrid approach. What we're really looking at is digital optimization. No more, no less than that. That means then, and this is my central argument, the events of the future are not digital. The events of the future are events, plus targeted virtual communication. Trust is absolutely vital for business transactions and all personal transactions, as a matter of fact. So, presence is the essence, is obligatory, being on the spot, and online is the icing on the cake, not the vice versa. So, less is more. No digital overkill. Bear that in mind. You don't want everyone at your event to be sitting, staring all the time at their smartphone rather than paying any attention to the actual event. That would be somewhat of a shame, would it not? Thank you all very much for your attention.